Hello and welcome to Sam Not So Wise. My name is Sam and today I want to talk about everything happy and shiny in post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction. The reasons I want to talk about this are twofold. One being that these are two of my favorite subgenres within the sci-fi sphere, and two is that recently I've seen quite a few examples of people conflating the two genres, getting confused between them, calling something that to me is quite obviously post-apocalyptic, calling it dystopian, and vice versa. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not telling anybody off for doing this and getting them confused and conflated, because they do share some similarities, some thematic concepts, and how wonderfully joyous they are. But to me, they are two different and distinct genres. So today I want to talk about the key differences between the genres, any similarities they might have, and some recommendations that I have read. So with much further ado, let's talk about some puppies and rainbows. So first, I want to talk about post-apocalyptic fiction. And to get us started off in each of the genres, I'm going to give a dictionary definition of them to see if they hold any differences in how they describe the genres. So Merriam-Webster calls post-apocalyptic as existing or occurring after a catastrophically destructive disaster or apocalypse. So as you can hear, the name suggests what it is about. It's in the name, and in the definition, it features an apocalypse. So the focus of the narrative is very much an aftermath of a global event. And kind of the classic examples of these are nuclear fallout, so after a huge world nuclear war, or something like a pandemic, as if they ever happen, you know? So first thing to note is with an apocalyptic book or post-apocalyptic book, there is a lot of death. We're talking the majority of the world's population dying from disease or nuclear holocaust or whatever. And we kind of look at the scraps that are left over, the small roving bands of people who are surviving the wasteland after everybody's died and the infrastructure has just completely collapsed. So the classic stories are generally surrounding survival in this new world. A lot of focus is put on finding food and shelter and just being safe, being able to last another week, another month, another year. Hopefully something will come along, someone clever will come along and make the world better again. It's a lot about rebuilding societies, so bringing people together, and also the antagonists in these stories tend to be people who are taking advantage of this world and taking advantage of how people are so desperate. They're just out for themselves and they want to grasp power. Sometimes these books can also be about discovering what has caused this event. So it may be further in the future and kind of the history of what has happened is lost because everybody's just been focusing on survival for so long. And then people are starting to wonder, why did this happen? Let's have a look, let's discover, let's investigate. So yes, generally post-apocalyptic fiction is the aftermath of a huge world event, which has caused the deaths of say 90+% of the world's population, and people are just surviving. And they generally tend to be very character based because it's about people surviving together and how they can overcome these odds. So what post-apocalyptic books can I recommend to you? The first one, a very famous, obvious one, is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is my battered old copy. Talk about a depressing book. What I find really interesting about this book is we don't know what caused the apocalypse. All we know is that everything is basically ash. There are very few people around, and everybody who is around is very dangerous because they are on the edge. They are just surviving. They are finding the smallest scraps of food, anything that will help them through their lives. But the main focus of this is the story between a father and a son and their relationship and their survival, and basically trying to find a place where they can have a future within this desolate world. It's super depressing, super grim, and yes, the world is basically dead and people are just about surviving. It's superbly well written, as I understand a lot of Cormac McCarthy is. This is the only one I've read by him, and it is super grim. If you want grimness to the max, read this. The next one I'll talk about is The Stand. Now this is a fantasy book. So most post-apocalyptic and dystopian tend to be in the sci-fi realm, but this one is very much fantasy. This is my battered old copy, and as you can see, it's a little bit big, 1,200 pages or something, the unabridged version. Now this is a story about a pandemic, a global pandemic where 99.6% of the world die from a virus. Also, what's interesting about this book as well is it's not just post-apocalyptic, it's pre-apocalyptic too. So you actually see the downfall of the world. You start watching people get this disease and crumbling, and everybody's families, and you watch that through the eyes of the survivors. And then the story develops into people coming together, and there's a supernatural entity, shall we call it, I don't know, person, I guess, who brings a lot of people together. And then there's the antagonist who's also bringing people together, and they kind of butt heads about how to establish the world back again. As with any Stephen King book, this is highly character focused. We have a lot of characters, there's so many of them, but you get to really know all of them because Stephen King is the master of that. And you really start to love and hate a lot of these characters. And it's gripping, even though it's humongous. You don't want to put it down because King is the king. So yes, huge fantasy, post-apocalyptic. The next one I'll talk about is Richard Matheson, I Am Legend. So we have a zombie apocalypse in this, or rather vampire apocalypse. So supernatural again, but I would kind of put it in the world of sci-fi. This is my Galant's Sci-Fi Masterworks book in its library cover, which is very swish. Aren't you jealous? It's very short, but this is super gripping. It's about basically one guy surviving on his own, pushing out these vampires, and it's kind of heartbreaking because you get the backstory as well, even within this small page count, but you also see his genius in trying to survive. And then the ending of this book is extremely thought-provoking. So if you want thought-provoking zombie vampire type things and pure survival and loneliness, this is the book for you. Very good. Now, I wasn't going to talk about the next one because I don't want the video to be an hour long, but I love this book so much I have to. And it's John Wyndham, The Day of the Triffids. Check out my battered old copy and that artwork. Woohoo! I love crappy old sci-fi artwork. Love it. Now this I would call comfortable post-apocalyptic because it does have a certain charm, a British charm. And the writing is kind of cozy, even though these weird plants are coming and killing everybody and taking over the world. And with this one, you do see the event happen as well. So it's both pre and post-apocalyptic. And as usual, it's about survival and people coming together to refresh and survive together, strength in arms, that kind of thing. Cozy, catastrophe, amazing. So now let's talk about dystopian fiction. And we'll start with the definition. So dystopia is an imagined world or society in which people live wretched, dehumanized, fearful lives. So in a dystopia, the world as we know it basically still exists, but it is altered. So there has been no world-ending event, no humongous catastrophe, and basically a lot less deaths. most people are still alive. That's the biggest difference. So the focus is generally more on political or social struggles of a society that hasn't yet collapsed. It may be on its way to collapsing, but it's not a world in which almost everybody is dead, basically. These books generally tend to be a commentary based on responses of fear to possible futures that we may see coming, generally involving political control, surveillance, censorship, that kind of thing, or perhaps some kind of technological innovation. So whereas post-apocalyptic, there is basically no society, everybody's scrapping to survive. Dystopian fiction has a functioning society, but this focuses on loss of freedom. So people are severely downtrodden, and you're looking at their story, trying to survive in this world, trying to understand it, perhaps trying to beat it. So those are the main differences. Dystopia, the society still exists, but it is damn depressing and nobody is free, essentially. So now we must talk about some book recommendations within dystopian fiction. And first we talk about the big three extremely famous examples. And obviously I will start with my favorite book of all time, which is 1984 by George Orwell. This book broke my tiny little brain when I first read it, and I've reread it many times and it still does that. And this focuses on a society which is severely controlled by the upper government. So everybody is under constant surveillance, history is constantly altered, and the government really try to control your mind through propaganda and a new language. It's a really deep book, and I could probably speak about this for a long time, but I'd have to gather my thoughts because I'm a rambler. But this is the quintessential dystopian. So the world still exists, but nobody has freedom. Everybody is watched, and you cannot trust what you read or see in the newspapers. So the next book I'll talk about is A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is very different to 1984, and the focus is mainly on genetic science. So people are born into their roles through bioengineering. People from the time they are a fetus, basically, are genetically designed to do the jobs that the society wants them to do. So everybody has a very specific place in a society. And the story then focuses on one of the people who work within these scientific labs, traveling to the societies that are outside of this main governmental area. And what ensues is a question of whether this is the right thing to do. So again, this is a society that is very much up and running, but it has very strong technological ideals which give people a lot less control with their lives. They are born into what they do. So the third in the big three is Fahrenheit 451 or 451 if you're American. This is my horrible little copy. And this book is very much focused on government censorship. So in this world, books are banned, and if you're found with a book, the books get burnt and your house gets burnt. And the story focuses on a fireman, who are the people who cause these fires in this book. And a little bit like Brave New World, the perspective changes when somebody comes into the story and introduces him to a book, and he reads a book. And therefore he starts to question the society that he lives in. And then from there, all sorts of hijinks ensue. So yes, very much a society that is working, but the control is ironclad, and you cannot read books. Books are being banned as if that would ever happen. That's never going to happen. This is not, it's fiction, you know, it doesn't happen. Obviously, we have The Handmaid's Tale. This goddamn sticker, I can't get it off without leaving just a big sticky mess. In The Handmaid's Tale, this is almost like a pre-apocalyptic book, because basically not many people are fertile anymore. There's very few women that are fertile. It's the women that are infertile. And so therefore the society rounds up the fertile women, and they are then distributed to the upper class families within this world to basically become brood mares. You know, they become baby making machines, and they can even be swapped around houses and parts of the society, and it's horrible. But it's brilliant. It's a true work of feminist fiction. Margaret Atwood is very well known for being a feminist writer, and yeah, it's super dark. Again, the society is functioning, but there's a high control on basically who can have babies, and it's the upper class. And the lower class, who are they? What are they for? Anyway, next we have Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go. I'm not going to say much about this because you kind of find out what the dystopian nature of this world is as you go along. But it is a dystopian world in which a technology, if you like, is severely affecting how people treat each other. And I just very much recommend you read it and find out for yourself. Ishiguro has this knack of writing stories where you can just feel that there's something creepy going on, and gradually you find out what it is. So hopefully I have somewhat convinced you that there are differences between the two genres. In a nutshell, post-apocalyptic, huge world event causing nearly everybody to die. The remaining people are surviving. And dystopian, there's not been a huge world event. Most people are still alive, but they are under a modicum of control by the governing powers. So what do they have in common that causes people to conflate and confuse the two? The obvious one is they are both incredibly depressing. Nobody's happy, that we're focusing on anyway, generally. The characters tend to have a lot of reduced agency, and they're struggling against the dangers of their world. Also, these two genres generally tend to be in the not too distant future. You rarely see books of these kind that are really, really far in the future. And therefore they are they're warning fiction. Warnings of what could happen if we're not careful, playing around with technology or increasing the control of governments, that kind of thing. And I think that's the biggest one, is that they're both generally warning fiction of worst case scenarios if we're not careful what we're doing now. Okay, we've finally got to the end of the video. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening to my ramblings. I love these genres. If you think I'm wrong, please let me know. If you have any additional thoughts, I would love to know. And also recommend some books to me. I'm not necessarily running out, but I'm running out of the ones that I have heard of and have been on my TBR for some time, but I'm always looking for more stuff. So please let me know. And that is it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.